Wilson, and welcome to another edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
I came to Boston 80 years ago to play a concert, you know, in the streets. All I heard was Mary Baker Eddy. They gave me a paper up to my room, and I started to read all about Mary Baker Eddy. And the different papers had different accounts, and some of them praised her to high heaven, and others took her to terms. I'll tell you some of the most terrible things I ever read.
As the 20th century began, Mary Baker Eddy was among the most controversial figures in the United States. Other American women were controversial. The reformers Margaret Fuller, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony. But few aroused feelings so intense and so contradictory.
Sentimental as a girl, garrulous, ungrammatical, uncomprehensible, affected, vain over little human ancestry, unstable, inconsistent, and unreliable in statement, and naively and everlastingly self-contradictory.
The founder of the American Red Cross, Clara Barton, said,
"Love permeates all the teachings of this great woman. So great, I believe, that at this perspective we can scarcely realize how great."
Those adjectives of Mark Twain, sentimental, affected, inconsistent, and vain, were the typical adjectives used by male chauvinists of the time, who were uninterested in having their toes trodden on by women.
Mary Baker Eddy is controversial because she is entirely opposed to all the limited conventional ways of looking at the world. And again, when one thinks of her life from different perspectives, one finds this uncompromising attitude, which is really the prophetic attitude.
What you've just seen is a segment from the documentary film, Mary Baker Eddy, A Heart in Protest. It's about the life of Christian Science founder, Mary Baker Eddy. And here we have to discuss with us the unique contributions of Mrs. Eddy and the practices of the Christian Science faith tradition is Christian Scientist and Austinite Nancy Shivers. And I suspect it's Shivers, isn't it?
You're right.
And I would like to also have you tell us, Nancy, about the what we just seen on this film clip as an expression of what Christian Science Church is about today, and how you would, if very quickly, for someone who doesn't know anything about your faith tradition, how you would respond to that.
Well, of course, the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy have always been kind of a protest to the way we look at life, and a protest to sin, disease, and death, really. She felt that God was a God of love, and that these were things, sin, sickness, and death were things that were unlike God. And as Jesus healed them, destroyed them, so we should today.
Mm-hmm. So the heart of the protest was in being contrary to the conventional wisdom or perception about sin, sickness, and death.
Mm-hmm.
And that what was it that aroused such controversy in her views?
I really don't know. Having been a Christian Scientist all my life and seeing God as love, it's hard for me to see why people want to cling to sin, sickness, and death as being part of man. But I think it's any idea, any thought that contradicts the way we're used to thinking of things is resisted.
Okay. Well, it would seem that the notion of God as love would not be so much the issue for most folks as they might learn about this, but the what seems like maybe the denial of sin, sick, Sickness and Love, common sense seems to tell you, you know, you got a toothache, or you've done that which you shouldn't have done, sort of thing. That may be closer to why people have reacted
Right.
in the way they have toward it.
Right.
How do you, I mean, Christian Science very often is identified with the faith tradition that says, you know, if you have a positive attitude, then you can take care of your own illness. You don't need a doctor.
Well, Christian Science goes a step further than that very good attitude of self-responsibility, because it's relying on God to take care of us in every way, just as we all rely on God for guidance and to help us make decisions and so forth. But this is relying on God, as Jesus did, for health as well as every other aspect of our lives.
So it's almost a radical dependence on God.
Yes, truly is.
I mean, most faith traditions would say we are utterly dependent on God, but you're doing something in terms of affirming what that means and how that applies in daily life.
When the people started the Christian Science Church, it was about 1879. They started it to commemorate the works of Jesus, which included primitive Christianity and its lost element of healing. And it was Mrs. Eddy's desire to follow Jesus as closely and completely, which included relying on prayer for healing physical problems as well as emotional and others.
So an attempt to reinstate the healing ministry of Jesus in the modern world. Okay, and today we're familiar with the term faith healing. I think it sometimes is, you know, has obviously gotten beyond what Christian Science is meaning by faith healing. Could different meanings to that. What is the meaning that you focus on?
Well, faith healing can, of course, if it brings healing, it's very good. We all want healing from any kind of anguish. But real Christian Science healing is based on an understanding of God, and an understanding of God as love, and God is an ever-present power, and that we can appeal to that power and expect to see it work in an almost scientific way.
Okay, and that's where the word science comes in. There's a science to it that you see as other than just kind of closing your eyes and believing 20 impossible things before breakfast, sort of thing.
Right.
Okay. There's another clip that we have that we might look at now that highlights some of those faith aspects of your practice. And if we could have that, then we'll have a chance to comment on it.
And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. As I mentioned before, I'll now read from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, the Christian Science textbook. Moses declared as Jehovah's first command of the 10, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." This me is spirit. Therefore, the command means this: thou shalt have no intelligence, no life, no substance, no truth, no love, but that which is spiritual.
So it seems that what we have here is something of a model of what happens in a Christian Science service, where you have the reading of the Scripture, and then you have reading from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. And that's the way it goes.
Yes. We don't have a ordained clergy, but readers are elected from our congregation, and they serve for 3 years, and they read the sermon. Our pastor is the Bible and Science and Health, and they read the selections.
And they're not making their own commentary on what that scripture means, or what Mary Baker Eddy's interpretation means. It's just it's just the reading between these two sources of inspiration.
It gives the individual an opportunity to have his own inspiration and to see what the scripture means to him at that particular time.
And you have singing and
Yes.
other aspects of what we would
Yes.
consider to be a worship service?
Yes.
And the way the Science Church is governed, just give us a little bit of a sense of its polity, the authority in the church.
I might mention here, just to add, we have another church service on Wednesday evenings where there's reading from the scripture and from Science and Health, and then members of the congregation stand up and share their healing experiences.
Oh, okay. So that's an important part then.
Yes, so we have both a Sunday and a Wednesday evening service.
In Austin here, where are the Science churches located?
It's on 14th and Guadalupe,
Okay.
downtown. It's been there since 1958, that building.
And before the show, you were telling me that there's one of the outreaches of the church involves a reading room.
Yes, we just opened a reading room on Trinity and 1st Street, 102 Trinity, across from the Convention Center. And that's open daily, and people of all faiths are welcome there. They can come in. There's a study room where they can read the Bible and their Bible commentaries. We also have a computer that has Bible concordance on it for quick access, and you can print out what you're researching. So it really is an outreach to the community, kind of a quiet place that you can come during the day. Sometimes we need that.
Right, just a bit of a retreat center.
Yes.
Well, I was raising the question with you before about the authority in the church and the extent to which each local church govern itself, or do you have connection? I know there's a mother church in Boston.
Right, right. The mother church in Boston was set up by Mrs. Eddy, and it was also, she wrote the church manual, which is the laws for the church, for the Christian Science Church in its international outreach. And the local churches then are branches of the mother church, but each local church around the world is governed democratically, sorry, democratically on its own basis.
Okay, so you elect your own officers and your own
Yes.
readers and so on.
Yeah.
And one of the things, too, that I think is important for folks to know is that if you have, and this is probably the most typical question you would get as a scientist, but you have a child that is taken with a sudden attack of appendicitis, or what seems like appendicitis, and the question is, if it becomes an at-risk case, how do you counsel your members in terms of, do you go to a doctor, or is this radical dependence on God, going back to the heart of the faith, preclude that?
No, it's really up to the individual, the parent, if the child is not old enough to know what's going on. It is so natural for us to turn to God in prayer for healing of physical things as well as everything else, that would be what a Christian Scientist would do first, just naturally. It's interesting because we feel that it's a way of worshiping God. Destroying sickness is honoring God in His goodness. And so it's just natural for us to do it all our lives. We worship with our lives. And as I say,
it's a parent's choice in a sense with the child.
Yes, right. And so if a parent was not feeling that they were making any headway with it, if the child was not getting better and they wanted to go to the emergency room or to a doctor or whatever, that's perfectly fine. They would not be ostracized from the church or anything like that.
Hasn't there been some opportunity for people, if they want to learn more about the Science Church, we've given them the place that they can come and visit, and it's open to anyone. Is that the case?
The reading room?
The reading room and
the church services.
Too.
Yeah.
Well, you've been most open with us today, Nancy. We really appreciate your spending this time with us. And after a short break, we'll return and take a look at one of the most important aspects of the Christian Science Church today, and that is its newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor. Stay with us.
Serving Austin means serving you. Each day, Austin Metropolitan Ministries is religion in action, providing affordable housing, caring for the elderly, marching against hunger, and much more. AMM promotes understanding, cooperation, and social involvement. So when we ask for your help, we're really asking to help you, Austin. To find out how you can help Austin Metropolitan Ministries help Austin through its member organizations, just call 472-7627.
Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue. Our next guest is Scott Pendleton, an Austin-based staff writer and reporter for the Christian Science Monitor. Scott, we thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Rich.
And would like to just have a quick look at just one of the recent front pages of the Monitor to indicate that this is familiar to many in the general public. It's not a publication just for and by Christian scientists, as I understand it.
No, I'd say half of our readers are non-scientists, as we say. We have a circulation of about 120,000, and quite a few of those are subscribed to by government officials of one sort or another, a lot of college professors and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I've had occasion to learn that along with the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor is one of the most respected of the newspapers in the country, despite its relatively small circulation. And why is that? What is it that you do that makes it that way?
What people tell me over and over is that they love how fair the Monitor is. And as a trained journalist, I would think normally that all newspapers would be fair in their approach, but readers seem to perceive in the Monitor something more even-handed about us than often than their local paper or maybe even one of the other national papers.
Mm-hmm. So a certain balance to the treatment.
Certainly, and we would, of course, strive for that. The Monitor, the very first editorial in the Monitor, which was written by Mary Baker Eddy, said that the purpose of the newspaper should be to injure no man but to bless all mankind. And I often think about that as I work on my stories. Certainly, we would not be attempting to, in covering some sort of conflict, whether it's Bosnia or Barton Creek, we're not out to say that someone's a villain. We're working to help uncover where progress can be made, where the conflicts can help be resolved.
Oh, in other words, this is a kind of a practical expression of the positive viewpoint of finding things that are good news and not just reporting all the bad news or sensationalism.
That's right. We have no sensationalism in the Monitor. That's one of the ways in which we differ from other newspapers. We also don't have things like horoscopes and tidbits about the media stars. So
either earthly or heavenly stars. Huh?
That's right. We just take a very sober approach, I guess you would say, and cover the news from that perspective. And I have to say that it's a real relief to me as a journalist to realize that my boss would never want me to do something unethical to get to the news, and I'm not expected to invade people's privacy when I report a story. That we're not about titillating people with intimate details of people's lives that they don't want published.
Sure.
So we don't even do those stories at all generally.
What are some of the kinds of stories you've done about Austin? And I know you cover Texas, central part of the states. What have you done specifically about that in Austin?
The Senate race has been very interesting, and the school reform process, which is such an important issue and is has ramifications nationwide. So many states are going through the same process. I think one of the most important stories I've done about Texas is the issue of water. And what triggered my interest was the struggle that San Antonio is having over the Edwards Aquifer and how much water there is going to be in that. But it's a statewide issue, and it's really a national issue for the West that cities like Phoenix have already faced up to.
So you've been focusing on what is both local and regional, but always has some kind of national or more global significance to it.
Often the stories that we work on have some implication. You know, people everywhere seem to face the same sorts of issues, and it's useful to find out how people are solving an issue in Texas. It helps people maybe somewhere else. We give them an idea that they can use and try at home.
A friend of mine was the editorial page writer for the Chicago Sun-Times for several years and taught journalism after that. And I remember his saying that one thing about the Monitor that was distinctive is that so often newspapers pick up, well, what's happening today or yesterday immediately, and which is the natural focal point. But he says the Monitor has a tendency to step back and see things in a broader context, that they report the background, not just the foreground of the news, which would sort of time with what you're saying of what is not just a local interest today, but has kind of a historical and into the future significance.
That's right, and of course the radio and television breaking news instantly. All newspapers have to do something more than simply report what happens, and that's especially true for the Monitor because you know we go out through the Daily Mail, so there's a lag time there, and that's fine with us because what happened today isn't the whole story, and you have to look deeper, and that's our whole approach, to find, to really sift the news for the significance and to bring that out.
Now, to call a newspaper the Christian Science Monitor suggests that you have some religious emphasis to it. What is that religious emphasis?
Well, first of all, we're published by the Christian Science Church, so that's why we're called the Christian Science Monitor. And I've heard it said that if we were simply called the Monitor, people might go around saying, oh, well, did you know it's really owned by the Christian Science Church? Well, we have nothing to hide. We're, you know, we're proud of the Monitor. Yes, we do have one article in each issue called the Daily Religious Article, and there's also an advertisement usually for Science and Health. That's the rest of the 20 pages of the newspaper are devoted to news, but approached as we've been describing, but no religious intrusion into the news. We're reporting, you know, the news as news.
I at one time heard that the word death doesn't occur, or that someone died. Is that still the practice, or?
No, that was an early practice, and there were a lot of things that that didn't make it into the Monitor. For instance, Christian scientists are instructed in Science and Health to not use caffeine or any sort of you know, drug. We're drug-free, and so often tea and coffee were omitted in the early days. But now we don't feel that that's so necessary, and we use the same terminology as other people do. Although we still do, you know, very much have our own beliefs on that. Those of us, and not every reporter for the Monitor is a Christian Scientist, but most of the staff is.
So it's more in terms of, like we were talking about earlier, perceiving what can be positively said about what's going on, as well as trying to report the facts otherwise. And I suspect you're trying to be realistic and not trying to cover over bad things.
You know, the World Trade Center blew up. I mean, the parking lot blew up. You know, there's no way to paper over that, and we wouldn't. But we start in immediately with, you know, you know, what were the causes? Why did that happen? You know, who was involved? You know, what's the implications? You know, where do we now need to be careful? What does that mean for immigration? You know, so many things come out of that.
I think, too, at the very beginning of the program, we had this film clip about Mary Baker Eddy, and that she was part of the feminist movement in the 19th century. Susan B. Anthony, Margaret Fuller, and others at the time who were leading out the leading edge of raising of consciousness about women's rights and capabilities and so on. Does that translate today in terms of an emphasis on feminism within your publication?
An emphasis on feminism? No, I don't think so.
Or women's rights, or in other words, the fact that it was a very strong female leader who was the founder of the paper. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a special emphasis on the feminist movement.
I think all Christian Scientists are sensitive to the fact that women are equal to men, because we're all the children of God, and I'm treading on Nancy's area a little bit, but you know, it's just sort of inherent in us to think that way. Mrs. Eddy, a woman, founded our religion, and so it seems natural to me to certainly we would address any issue where women are not getting their due, but I don't think we focus on that in any.
Not a special.
No, I
emphasis.
don't really think so.
Just sort of an assumption that you make.
Well, it's inherent.
One other thing too that's made the secular press otherwise is that the Christian Science Church was into television and into other media besides the Monitor, and that this created some problems in terms of the financial aspects of it and so on. Can you just update us on where you are on that?
Right. A decision was made back in the mid-'80s to go into television. That was perceived as where audiences are today, and it was an expensive undertaking, and in the end they decided that we couldn't sustain that. So now they have gotten out of television and are pretty well disposing of whatever assets they acquired.
I see.
Now we still have broadcasts in form of shortwave radio, and American Public Radio picks up a program here in the U.S.
I see. Well, you've helped us pick up on what is really an important aspect of Christian Science and of our times otherwise. I think we're grateful to your work and to the work of the Monitor for giving us this insight. Scott Pendleton, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
And thank you folks for looking in on our edition of Austin Faith Dialogue today. On behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan